Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media Webinars. Welcome to today's webinar on tailings. We've brought together a highly regarded panel who will unpack tailings success stories as well as the benefits of well-managed land rehabilitation. A big thank you to our sponsors, Agreenco Group, DRD Gold, Harmony Gold, and Knight Piésold Consulting for their support in making this conversation possible. Before we dive in, just a couple of quick notes on housekeeping. The Q&A box is open at the bottom of your screen. Please pop your questions in there and our panelists will do their best to cover as many as possible. The chat is also open for your comments and insights. Just remember the questions in the Q&A and conversations in the chat. This session is being recorded and you'll receive the link afterwards. We're also streaming live on YouTube. The link will be shared in the chat once it's available. With that, let's get started. Today's conversation will be facilitated by Charles MacRobert, an Associate Professor of Geotechnical Engineering in the Department of Civil Engineering at Stellenbosch University. He's a professional engineer and provides specialist consulting for the characterization and modeling of geomaterials for global stability and seepage assessments. Charles will facilitate the discussion with our panel, which consists of Andries Strauss, Director at Knight Piésold South Africa, Fanus van Wyk, Director at Agreenco Group, and Rollet Masakona, Head of Metallurgy at Harmony Gold. I'll hand over now to our facilitator to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Shannon. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. Welcome everyone to this webinar. I understand there's a very large audience this afternoon, so it's great that we have this interest from the industry. This webinar is titled Tailings Success Stories and the Benefits of Well-Managed Land Rehabilitation. And we really hope that we will share some of those success stories with you today and just show really what are the benefits of well-managed land rehabilitation, as the title goes. I think to kick things off, I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves. And then to set the scene, I would like each panel member just to explain what tailings are in as few words as possible, just so that we're all on the same page with regards to that. So starting with perhaps Rollet Masakona, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and just tell us in a few words what tailings are for the audience.
Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rollet Masakona, Head of Metallurgy at Harmony. I've got about 25 years experience in the mining industry. So I've been around mainly from a background of as a chemical engineer, graduated from the University of Cape Town. So if I just really maybe answer your question on what tailings is. Obviously, I mean, in the mining industry, you do mine minerals, and at the end of that minerals, well, once you process and take out the valuable mineral, you do end up with the residue that you need to put somewhere, and that's what is called tailings. And that you got to obviously, build a mountain with it in a responsible way. If I use a layman's term.
Thanks. And let's ask Andries Strauss, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks, Charles. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Andries Strauss. I'm a director for Knight Piésold Southern Africa, based in the Sandton office. I also manage our mine residue business across the African continent. And in terms of a definition of what tailings is, I don't think anything Rollet said is wrong. I'm not going to repeat that, but we can also think of tailings as something we use to create a new land form. And for some mines, a tailings facility or material becomes a resource. And I think that's part of why we're here today, to understand what that means and what we do with that resource in the future. Thank you.
And finally, Fanus van Wyk, if you could introduce yourself. And maybe you can add something slightly different to the definition of tailings.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to a really good conversation. So yeah, I've been working for the past 25 years in tailings, and more recently in the coal fields as well, in the open pits. But I'm an engineering geologist by trade and ventured into industrial ecology. So we try and understand on the ground how to get rehabilitation more successful and more effective. So what I view tailings is nothing more than a volcanic eruption that has fast tracked, or that has weathered now to a point where it is nothing more than sand. It composes of natural resources as its growth medium, and obviously we need to try and keep them on one place. So that is to look at it more from a geological perspective, how I see a weathered heap of ore body, and it will have residual value that we also need to consider in rehabilitation because it might have continued value.
Well, I think that's really given us quite a wide spectrum of what tailings are, and really showing how it spans a number of different fields, all the way from metallurgy through civil engineering, all the way to geology, and looking at it from all those different aspects and ecology as well. A big part of our discussion today will be around rehabilitation, and particularly how this has been done by reprocessing and retreatment, and how industry is using retreatment and rehabilitation to drive its ESG commitments. So perhaps starting with Rollet, and speaking specifically about Harmony, how does Harmony ensure that tailings retreatment and rehabilitation align with Harmony's ESG commitments, while still balancing operational and economic realities?
Yeah, I think thanks, Charles. I think from Harmony's perspective, obviously, tailing reclamation and rehabilitations are closely linked to or aligned with our ESG commitments, addressing obviously the double materiality of both environmental risks and economic opportunities. So as we all know, many historical tailings were constructed on dolomitic formations, where seepage continues to put salt loading in groundwater systems. By reclaiming these tailings and relocating them to newly established facilities that are well designed and well constructed, one is able to remove or reduce significantly the impact into groundwater systems, and ultimately remove the source of contamination. So this approach obviously supports a circular economy by recovering valuable minerals and reducing environmental liabilities and pollution, thereby improving groundwater quality, mitigating long-term environmental risks. So reclaiming and reprocessing the tailings obviously contribute to extending the mine life. And when you have extended the mine life, you are able to sustain economic contributions and economic sustainability across the communities. You are able to keep people employed for longer, and you are able obviously to ensure that the sustainability of communities remains intact, thereby obviously generating social value by increasing also local procurement, social spend, supporting community development initiatives, and contributing to broader social and economic benefits. Harmony ensures obviously alignment by embedding ESG principles to every stage of tailings management. Environmental efforts obviously focus on water use, dust suppression, and biodiversity restoration. And if we look at, obviously, there's also social initiatives that include community engagements, post-mining and post-land use. And social initiatives obviously include all of those things. And then obviously there's a governance aspect of it, which obviously through the International Council of Mining and Metals, we align frameworks such as the GISTM, the Global International Standard on Tailings Management. We are able obviously to ensure that we bring real and sustainable benefits to our communities. So there's also an economic balance, which is achieved through life cycle costing, ESG integrated KPIs, and cross-functional oversight. And I would like to say, I think at Harmony, we really, focus on these things, and also ensuring that we, get our tailings to be GISTM compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, obviously addressing the historical seepage issues by reclaiming and putting them onto new facilities. I see in your background there's a nice lined facility there. So those are ways that you are driving your ESG commitments. And I think maybe turning to Andries, in this context of retreatment and rehabilitation, are the issues that Rollet raised, are they the similar issues that other mining companies are approaching you to? What are the main challenges and obstacles mining houses are facing, and how are you going about addressing those? You muted?
Thank you. I had to be that person. Yeah, it's. I think the answer is obviously yes. Many mining companies are experiencing the same challenges, and it really stems from, like Rollet mentioned, back in the day, tailings facilities were placed on the dolomites because they drain so nicely, and that created good drainage, good consolidation, and you ended up with a strong and stable facility, which is what we want. Since then, communities have developed and grown and developed their living areas closer and closer proximity to these facilities. And that becomes a problem, especially when these facilities are not closed well, and there's a lot of pollution risk and health challenges that they have to deal with. And the challenge then comes for the new mining company to, on the one hand, go and put all this material in a new facility that aligns with the current and the most recent legislation. That can sometimes be challenging, but it's the opportunity to correct the wrongs of the past, and at the same time address this footprint that you're going to leave behind where the old facility used to be, and create something useful out of it. I think we're going to talk about it more in detail, but it's also about involving the communities. What is it that they need for that land that stays behind once you've taken this old facility away? What do we do with it? What buy-in do we get from the community to give back something that is useful and has economic value to them? Yeah, I think let me stop there for now.
Maybe this is just a question, if anyone knows the answer, that's in the chat here. Are you aware of any cases of preferential taxation for companies engaged in tailings recycling? Anyone? I don't know. I'm not aware of any, but it's no.
No, not aware.
Okay. Well, yeah. So just a reminder to the audience that if you have got questions, please feel free to use the Q&A facility to do those. But continuing with our conversation, and turning now to Fanus, with Agreenco, you have implemented several innovative and cost-effective rehabilitation projects over the years. How have these solutions evolved over time? And what examples of innovative solutions can you share that have reduced environmental risks and costs?
Thank you. Yeah, that's quite a mouthful. So I think I'll try to keep my answer as short as possible. So, I mean, obviously, over, let's say, the past 30 years, there's been a certain way and culture in which tailings facilities have been built. And most of those facilities are now in operational and decommissioning phase. and obviously the design and the planning, dictates what happens in the operational phase. And since there's been legislative changes, there's often not enough alignment with the outcomes that's required by the legislative changes versus what was, required at the design and at the original implementation phase. So there's a bit of tension there. ESG has also come along to say, well, we have to look now even further ahead. So why I'm starting with that is 30 years ago, it was good enough for us to put green covers on tailing facilities, and we had to understand the geochemistry fairly well. And in that sense, the green cover, protected the geotechnical integrity of the facility quite well. There was a lot less cost on erosion control, and also, a lot less dust issues, and obviously a lot more evapotranspiration, so a lot drier tailings facilities on the outside. Now, all of a sudden, we've moved along to say, well, we need to start to, protect these facilities to disintegrate into the future. And we have to start to design now for 500 and 1,000 years ahead so that these facilities remain where they are, and where we can create a landscape that is suitable for future type land use. So I think the innovation where we've been really, fronting it up was in being able to put sustainable green covers, or sustainable green covers, quote unquote, where there's a lot lower maintenance, and in doing that, obviously there's a huge cost advantage for the mines. But moving ahead now, in terms of final landscapes, we need to start to think of brown cover systems or grey cover systems, which are becoming more favorable now, where the facilities are lined. And now we have to say, well, can we, put this facility under a cover? And obviously, if we design these covers properly, then we can actually store and release water in those cover systems, with a lot less water reporting to the groundwater. And we can also have, erosion scenarios where the analog erosion of the environment adjacent equals that of the tailings facility, so that we don't have any net erosion into the environment and therefore less pollution. So to summarize, advancing cover systems and pricing them correctly and implementing them correctly, I think there's been a lot of innovation there where we've shown that it can be done. Out of the 400 odd facilities in South Africa, I'm only aware of 5 or 6 that's provided topsoil for covers. So there's a whole nother conversation. But I do think that we've learned a lot about those cover systems. More recently has come along geomorphic design, where we can start to build these facilities geomorphically. And I think that will also reduce a lot of cost over time, although in South Africa, it's only in inception phase. So moving from green covers, using the mine's water systems for dust suppression, moving on to brown covers, and obviously onto sustainable surfaces, yet respecting the geotechnical integrity. I think that is the sweet spot that we have contributed to.
Maybe just for the audience, if you could briefly define what you mean by grey and green covers.
So, I mean, a green cover is really a vegetative layer. And that was historically seen as good enough for closure. But what we've seen is over time, these covers require a lot of maintenance. And in the operational and deep into decommissioning phases, when we still have very steep geometric designs, these green covers can really battle because of the chemistry. So we need to come back and often re-revegetate and remanage and re-ameliorate a lot of these really bad tailings geochemistries. And I mean, that is just the nature of it. Way back when we actually took the pyrite out and we take, your sulfates out of the tailings, and then we didn't have the risk of vegetation dieback. But since we have these constituencies in our tailings materials, we have to deal with them, with soil fertility, with soil amelioration. So that is a green cover. And, a lot of the mining companies also, commit to putting biodiversity back on tailings facilities. And although that is a really good idea, we need to be very realistic as to the adaptability of vegetation, because at this stage, what we see across tailings facilities are that the biodiversity is actually not very high. It's in ecology, we talked about disturbance state. So there's probably about 10 to 12 species on those tailings facilities, and we want them to be much more, but then we have to give them a growth medium to sustain that biodiversity, and it's going to cost more. So that is the tension between providing a green cover system. A brown or a grey cover system is either a rock rock cladding on the facilities. We just cover the whole system with rock, and a brown facilities where we bunker the facility with soil, and in that way your soil armor becomes the first line of defense. Whilst in the grey cover, your rock armor is the first line of defense, and on green covers, the vegetation is the first line of defense. But looking 500 and 1,000 years ahead, we have the technology now to model what's going to happen with these facilities, with these various cover systems, and therefore we need to become very realistic what the current cover system's abilities are.
I've got myself muted. Thanks for elaborating on those different types of cover systems. And I think we will maybe ask a little bit later about agriculture and how that relates to all of those. But perhaps moving on to maybe not discussing too many of the problems that we've been facing, but maybe some of the success stories. So Andries, could you perhaps share some of the technological innovations that are currently shaping best practice with regards to tailings operations and mine rehabilitation?
Yes, thanks, Charles. So starting firstly on the operational side of things, there's a lot that's happening at the moment, and a lot of that is driven by some of the major tailings failures that's happened in the world, that culminated then in the publication of the global industry standard for tailings management, or better known as the GISTM. Essentially, this is a standard that the world would want to comply with, and some of the aspects in there is talking about things like having a mine with zero tailings. We need to limit our footprint, limit the use of water, create robust designs. They talk about the monitoring, and the ideal term that's been thrown around is real-time monitoring. To me, that's a very difficult thing. And there's a lot of systems out there that tries to get there. But the more data you get back, the faster you get it back, the better you can react and predict what may happen with the facility. And some of these systems that's connected to telemetry and satellites and radio systems and the internet, they all feed in, giving us data from things like piezometers and inclinometers, movement beacons. You can even connect up turbidity meters and flow meters, and that gives you a dashboard where you can at one glance assess the current performance of your TSF. You will build in triggers to know that if a certain piezometer is going above a certain level, it is a sign of something starting to go wrong and you need to take action. UAVs, that's another technology that has become very popular, very useful. There's a whole host of different types of sensors you can connect to these devices to carry out surveys, do video surveillance, take photographs. Some people have even used them to take water samples out of the pond. Moisture surveys, surveying pipelines. There's INSAR, the satellite monitoring. There's even a system out there where it acts like resistivity, but is permanently installed on your facility. So it's another real-time monitoring system out there that just adds to the tools you have to monitor the actual performance of the facility against the design parameters that you as the design engineer and then the engineer of record is taking through to ensure the safe operation of the facility. In terms of remining and rehab, there are also systems out there to take people away from the dangerous elements. Like back in the day, your monitoring guns were handled by a person right on the spot, standing, working with high pressure water on the top of a very high and steep slope. These days, they're remotely operated, and it can even go so far as to somebody sitting in the control room, physically even being on site. And there's different technologies being added, like automated pump stations and vibrating screens that just takes the human element out of it and optimize performance and thereby extends the lifetime of the equipment. There's also a system, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it. If we think of remining, there's essentially two methods. One is the load and haul type system, where you pick up the material with the excavator, put it on a truck, take it to the plant, or the hydro mining, where you slurry the material through a launder into a pipeline, pump it to the plant. And this system combines the two. If you have a risk of having too much water on the dam and it creates a stability risk for the facility, you essentially do the load and haul and then dump it into a containerized plant that slurries the material and it puts it straight into a pump. So you take away the water on surface hazard from the operation.
Thanks. A lot of development obviously has been taking place around the operations real-time monitoring. We're trying to get there, and just also dealing with the safety aspects of remining and how to do that safely. Perhaps turning to Rollet, are there any success stories you are particularly proud of? Showing how well-managed land rehabilitation has delivered lasting benefits for local communities around your operations. There's quite a few questions around how mining companies are dealing with local communities in the chat. So hopefully you can address some of those with your answer.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, certainly there are success stories. We've, I think, been in the reclamation business for quite a number of years. Through that practice of reclaiming a number of areas, we have been able to free up land. A particular example, I think in the Klerksdorp area in the northwest, we had two of our tailings dams that were very close to community, which obviously we have been able to mitigate dust concerns, improve environmental conditions, and free up land that is near residential areas that can be developed further for other activities. And if we just look in terms of our area in the Klerksdorp area, I mean, you're looking at over 1,800 hectares of land that is covered by tailings. And if we could, reconstitute that in a different space and be able to build smaller but probably higher tailings dams that are well engineered, we are able to probably half that space into a space that is 900 hectares from 1,800 hectares. So importantly, obviously, rehabilitated land increases post-mining opportunities, obviously, including photovoltaic energy use, which is what we see a lot these days, where people need land for solar panels, and some of that land is actually being used for those things. And then obviously biofuel generation facilities become viable in some of those lands, and these generate obviously additional social and economic value for that can obviously sustain communities beyond the mining has been taking place. If I share one of our most, I think, impactful story, in the Free State, we have a soil beneficiation operation that is 100% Black owned. This initiative, it's obviously reclaiming tailings from our legacy tailings dam in the Cyprus area in Virginia. And Harmony is a 76% shareholder in that initiative. We've seen this initiative over the years has created over 500 direct and indirect jobs. We've generated over 130 million profits into the system, and onboarded 25 local suppliers that are able to play a role in that space, and established scholarships fund that have awarded over 60 bursaries over this whole period. And obviously, through the revenue that is developed from there, it's put into developmental trusts that are able then to assist communities in advancing other activities in the communities. And then if we can also look into, again, in our northwest area, in the Kalgold area next to Mahikeng, we got a project there that land has been rehabilitated successfully and provided obviously support for local livestock farming. And also in the Free State, we've had small-scale farming and infrastructure development that has also been, able to come out of those activities. So certainly, I think the rehabilitating land and doing reclamation does bring quite a lot of benefits, more so for land use beyond mining. And Harmony obviously is guided by its sustainable development framework, which is really a blueprint for integrating sustainability into how we do our work, achieving obviously positive ESG outcomes and also leading to business operational excellence. So I think those are some of the things I can share.
There's a question in the Q&A just about research on tailings volume reduction. For instance, repurposing tailings into low value products. Is that anything that you are looking into, or are you alternative uses for the tailings that you produce? Is that anything that you are looking at?
Not quite. I haven't seen successful projects in that regard. So what we've been focused on to say, can we reduce the land that the tailings occupy? If we reprocess and repackage it, we can actually free up a lot more land and use a lot less land to store the tailings for the future. But as to alternative use, I know there's been studies that were done on can we use tailings for maybe forming bricks and all kinds of stuff, but I haven't really seen anything that has been more successful in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have been looking into whether we can use the tailings for low value products, and hopefully that is something that will produce something in the near future. But I think, as you say, focusing on opening up land for other uses is perhaps what we should be focusing on at the moment. And perhaps turning to Fanus, can you share how integrating agriculture and land use planning into rehabilitation can unlock long-term value for mining companies and communities? So just how using that land better can really help communities in particular. You on mute?
I think this is probably the most top of mind question at the moment if we consider circular economy and if we consider, where are we going to with regards to end land use. And my view on this is we need to add one word in that frame of mind, and that is commercial end land use. So, and if I can substantiate that, if we want to put agriculture back on backfilled open pit mines or tailings materials, we have to consider that we're working with an agricultural system that needs to produce a revenue, that needs to be collateralized by debt, and it needs to be built into a local scale of economy value chain. And if you downstream the products from those enterprises, then obviously this whole thing starts to make sense. So if we look at the data, or the data from projects where we are trying to put commercial cash crops back on mined land, the data shows that we can do it, but we cannot do it at a competitive cost. So I want to just bring in three scenarios here. And the first scenario is we have a disturbed soil that we ameliorate. We need at least a soil depth of 500 to 600 millimeters to store enough moisture so that you can produce a proper crop. That is principle of Agri 101. If we cannot produce a microbially and very microbially active and moisture-rich soil, it's very difficult even for a commercial farmer to farm on it. So we can produce cash crops and hemp and all of these very nice wonder plants, I call them wonder plants, on these tailings facilities, and we can downstream. The bottom line is if we can do it commercially. So if we increase the cost of soil amelioration, yes, we can. I'm not for doing agriculture on tailing slopes at all. If we consider top surface areas which are vast and where we don't have geotechnical risk, there's a case to be made if we can do it commercially. The third land type is obviously your old footprint and operational areas. And it comes back once again to what is the potential yield that we can produce off that land. And the data once again shows that it takes at least 5 to 7 years for that type of lands to establish, to come to some point of stability where your carbon nitrogen cycles get to a point where you can actually sustain healthy root zones. So if we talk from a land use perspective, if we talk about really challenging soils, we need to go back to principles and establishing vegetation or some sort of an agri-crop. We have to get back to, is it commercially viable? And yes, but it's going to cost more to get those soils organically rich. In terms of technology, we can do better irrigation, we can put in advanced carbon sources, and we can work with adaptive plants. Yes, I agree. Bottom line is it needs to be commercial, must make commercial sense. On the land, on the spatial development frameworks and SPLUMA, this is a very interesting one because at this stage, most mine land is either zoned as agriculture, industrial, very few is residential. I think we need a zone type for mine impacted land. And the reason I'm saying that is in order for us to get these mine impacted lands back to commercial viability, there's going to be different financials at play to do it. And there's going to be different permit implications for those lands. So linking the zoning and your spatial development and integrating those in terms of new land use, we will need to look at legislative framework to enable that. I think lastly, in terms of communities that wants access to land and that also wants to start with economic activities on these mine lands, I do believe that we do not currently have vehicles or the instruments to get it done simply because there's a liability associated to that land. And if you or give that land to any new owner, they will need to grapple with that liability. And in order for us to get those lands active again, any new landowner would like to go to a bank, borrow money, and start a 20-year enterprise. And if you have a liability attached to that land, it's really difficult to do it. So in summary, if we can find a way to put a legislative framework around mine impacted land to enable new land users to be able to raise money to do something productive at a higher cost base, yes, then we're in the money.
Thank you. That is an important point, that the land does become available, but it is a liability that's associated with it. And from a legal point of view, we probably haven't got the tools in place to deal with it. And perhaps I'd just like to, before we go on to our next questions, just from the rest of the panel, if there's anything that you would like to add. Have you heard another panelist speaking about something and something popped in your head that you wanted to mention? This is answer anything you didn't get a chance to speak on. All good. Okay. Well, let's. I see there are a lot of questions in the chat in the Q&A session, and maybe we will. Let me just see if there's one I can think of quickly here. Maybe this is a question that for anyone really, that a lot of people ask when we talk about tailings, they say, why don't we just put it back into the ground? And maybe someone can give a quick answer to that. Why do we have to deal with it on surface?
Charles, I think that is something JSTM also talks about, that the goal is zero tailings on surface, and it's a lofty ideal. There's nothing wrong with putting tailings below ground, and it often helps with rehabilitation of an open pit or underground workings and preventing that from future collapse or subsidence. But the devil's in the details, and you can't just put a toxic material underground and go and pollute groundwater, or like the AMD issues we have on the West Rand and elsewhere. So as long as it's a environmentally friendly, safe operation, not adding to pollution, and properly permitted and designed correctly, then absolutely that is a far superior option than putting something on surface.
Yeah, if I can add to that, fully agree with Andries. The void ratio is the real challenge in my view. So, I mean, the last study I've seen on gold tailings with specific gradings is we can only put 65% back. So we're still going to sit with 35% residual material. And, if we want to consider the challenges of, depositing tailings on a flat surface, if we want to deposit tailings back underground, with considering those dynamics, with very deep shafts and all of that there, I think, there's some different safety systems required. But I really think it's, and thirdly, obviously, if, your groundwater level can elevate to above your tailings line, then we can create anoxic zones, and then obviously we can stop the pollution. But the risks still outweighs the benefits. So I think that's just from my side. But it is a novel intent.
Maybe Rollet, is Harmony putting any of its tailings back underground?
Not, yeah, we are not putting tailings underground, except for obviously for the minimal backfill that is used for the mining. But that is also obviously well controlled. There is a process that backfill goes through in terms of cyanide destruction and all of that, to make sure that obviously we don't contaminate the underground environment. But on surface, we do have pit filling that we are doing, but that's on surface, not on underground.
Okay. Just another question from the audience. It's quite an interesting question. Which types of mines are the easiest to rehabilitate, and which are the most challenging? Or are they all equally challenging?
Should I take that one?
Yeah.
Okay. No, there are definitely mines that are much more challenging to rehabilitate. And once again, I want to separate rehabilitating a mine versus rehabilitating tailings versus rehabilitating old footprints. these are different land types. There are different substrates altogether, and they've got different geochemistries, and obviously they've got fairly different approaches and cost bases. So I don't want to generalize which are more difficult, and it is. We start with a with the geochemistry and the geophysics on the materials, and then work our way back. What I want to say is, as soon as something has high pyrite levels in excess of 1.5%, the reacidification of your substrates become a real challenge. And then we have to, and it's not something that stops. Reacidification continues. It's a geochemical and a microbial process, and you have to either live with the acidity or mitigate it, or you have to take the acidity out. And it's also the heavy metal contamination that's associated with the acidity. So taking the acidity out can solve many problems, and it is more or less your gold and coal mines that battles with acidity and pyrite in the ore. If we look at kimberlites, we're struggling with high sodium absorption ratios, with high high sodium, and a bit of sulfates. And if we look at the platinum tails, there's also a bit of sodicity there. But there the pH is alkaline, which has got other problems. So it's complex geochemistry. It's about how much water is in that substrate. That's the driver of a lot of the challenges that we have. If it's a dry material, there's lesser problems in terms of contamination, but more problems in terms of dust. So that's a really quick and dirty laydown, but it's a very complex question. So I hope I've done it justice.
No, well, I think you've definitely added to it and sort of highlighted some of the factors that makes it more complicated.
The least one, sorry, it's probably the lime quarries or inert quarries. So those are on the other end. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks. I think a lot of our questions have considered local communities and mining companies. We've also mentioned the government, and perhaps we can expand on the various stakeholders involved in remining and rehabilitation. So just to really set the scene, if I could ask each of you to state some of the stakeholders and their roles in remining and rehabilitation. So perhaps starting with Rollet, who are the key stakeholders involved, and what are their roles?
Look, I mean, obviously in reclamation and rehabilitation, one of the things you need to obviously find, it's a new piece of ground that you need to put your reclaimed tailings into. And obviously in doing that, there's obviously Department of Environment that you need to deal with in terms of doing a environmental study, specialist studies that you need to do for that piece of land that you want to use. You need to talk to the Department of Water Affairs, if you are, any water-related issues, be it wetlands that are impacted, or be it the water use that you need to be licensed for, the various water use. So, and then obviously communities that are in around the area that you work in. Obviously communities are interested in knowing, if this thing going to fail? And if it fails, is it going to come my way or not? So you obviously have to do a detailed study on the zone of impact, and then understand, which communities are downstream and upstream, wind directions, those kind of things, to be able to understand where is the dust going to go, if it fails, where is it going to go? How am I going to deal with all of those things? And obviously interact with those communities, and be able to obviously to get them to understand what you want to do, and the economic benefits that come with that. Obviously, there's both environmental and economic discussions that tends to happen with the communities. And the economic discussions obviously looks at employment, look at business opportunities for local SMMEs, and both during the construction phase and post-construction in the operational phase. So all of those are, I think, stakeholders. And then obviously you got technical experts, the geotechnical engineers that really has to do the design of these facilities. And then obviously environmental specialists like Fanus, where you got to consider what are you going to do at the end of the whole thing? What covers are you going to put in? Because I saw some of the questions, I think, on the chart about how do we deal with dust. Obviously, during operation, you deal with dust through probably spraying, and we got a new thing that we call concurrent rehabilitation, where basically the bottom slopes of your dam, you are able to do soil cover on them while you continue to construct the dam as you go up. So you got to look at all of those aspects, and then obviously being regulated in the DMPR space, the Department of Mineral Petroleum Resources. Those are some of the stakeholders that we got to consider. So it is quite a range of stakeholders that one has to talk to. Obviously, community authorities, local community authorities, like municipalities gets involved, and all of those things. Yeah.
Perhaps adding on to that, Andries, what role does stakeholder collaboration play in achieving these sustainable outcomes?
Yeah, Charles, I think the one key thing is if somebody sits in an ivory tower somewhere and decides that the future land use of this reclaimed land is going to be X because it suits him for whatever reason, and you don't have buy-in from the community and whoever is going to use that land, you're setting yourself up for failure in a big way. So you have to absolutely consider, again, communities living in the area around the facility and those who are going to use that land in future. Linking to one of the questions in Q&A asking about putting housing on a reclaimed gold facility with uranium and things in the ground. I think you need to be very careful about putting housing on a piece of land like that. It would most likely rather be some sort of light industrial type use. And again, go back to the people who've been in the area for a long time with the institutional knowledge as well of what was there before, what did we do in the past. And no single person has got all the answers. You need to make sure that you involve everyone, the person with the liability for the land, the communities in the area, the local governments, the spatial planners, the national government. You need to make sure that you get everybody around the table and consider everybody's inputs to come up with the best possible solution that everybody can be equally satisfied with.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of different people who need to be consulted. You've got, as you said, we don't want people in ivory towers somewhere making decisions about these pieces of land without any context, and understanding that context takes a lot of work. A phrase that we've been using in a number of the questions and answers are things like sustainable outcomes or sustainable closure. And perhaps, Fanus, you would be well placed to provide an answer for what some of the key indicators of positive outcomes for land rehabilitation, specifically linked to tailings operations. What are some of these indicators?
Thanks, Charles, for the hospital pass. So, I think understanding this question, we're way better in understanding it than 30 or 40 years ago. So I think there's been a lot of progress in understanding, this. So I think the first of the consideration is to start with what does legislation say about it, because that is what everybody would have to comply with. Now, basically 3 pieces of legislation that outlines what rehabilitation is and what closure is. So my go-to in terms of understanding specifically rehabilitation and closure, obviously MPRDA outlines that land has to go back to a pre-agreed condition, which is sustainable. So pre-agreed, that's become now the sort of go-to. In terms of the Mine Health and Safety Act, specifically states closure as something that is the geotechnical component is sustainable. There must be a plan to submit water management, and the land must be safe and stable. So when I started my career, a lot of mentors said, well, it needs to be safe, stable, non-polluting. Those three are not negotiable. And then GISTM came along, and everybody said, well, we need to protect the integrity of these facilities as the number one priority, and we need to protect that forever. So my point of view on sustainable rehabilitation of tailings is we need to first tick the box that this facility, that the freeboard would remain intact, that, that the factors of safety is guaranteed, and that there is an exceptionally good cover system that would protect the outer integrity of your tailings facility, so that the forces of wind and water erosion does not attack your outer stability of that tailings facility. So that's step number one. So if we can guarantee that, I think that is tick box one in terms of sustainability. If we go to tick box number two, the cover needs to be functional. So it needs to be in equilibrium or in balance with the environment around it in terms of erosion processes, in terms of how it percolates water through what is going to be the groundwater receiving environment. And my position on this is, if no water goes through at the top, no water will report to the bottom. So if we can keep water out the groundwater, then that is tick box number two. Rehabilitation is in the business of protecting groundwater resources. So if we can get that done, that is tick box number two for me. And we can do that these days through liners, but you can do it with very good cover systems where we can store and release moisture appropriately. So now comes number three. If we look at the side slopes of the facility, that needs to maintain its cover integrity, and you can either do it through root systems or rock systems or what have you. The top surface, obviously, there is where we can become creative in saying, well, can we use the space for something interesting? And then it comes back to whether if we use the space sustainably, it comes to, is it commercially viable? I've been on mines last week where we've seen big turbines generating renewable energy on top of these facilities. But is it commercially viable in South Africa? I've been in Zambia on sites where you've got solar panels on top of these facilities. If it's commercially viable and you've got a buyer for the revenue streams, then it's sustainable. But the bottom line is, if we want to create the perception that these lands are going to become part of a functional economic state in future, we need to be very, very careful if we commit to that. Because the geotechnical stability of these facilities come first. If we can design the risk out of these facilities, whether new deposition strategies, whether we build them flatter, I don't know. If we can take the risk out, then we can reintegrate them back into the landscape. So I would say the three tick boxes are: one, geotechnical stability; two, no water pollution; three, commercial end land use, which is viable, generates revenue streams that can cover debt. Then we are in the money. So that's my summary.
Yeah, I think that's very succinctly put. And perhaps maybe turning to Rollet, what are some key measures that Harmony is using to track whether they are achieving these sustainable outcomes or sustainable closure of their facilities?
Yeah, obviously with every facility, you have a sort of a program that you need to monitor, be it, boreholes that you drill around a facility. You are able to understand where the plume is going. And based on understanding that plume through sampling of the groundwater, you are able to model, where whether this is a shrinking picture or is it a growing picture. So those are some of the things that you do use to see whether you're making success. And obviously for lands that have been fully rehabilitated, you are obviously able to replant vegetation back into those lands and be able to see how that growth is coming through. And certainly, if you have done a good job in terms of removing all tailings and be able to scan for radiation in those areas, you are able to rehabilitate that land quite successfully. So I think those are some of the programs that we do use.
Okay. I don't know if we're getting towards the end of our webinar. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat that any of the panel has read and would like to give an answer to.
Yeah, Charles, I think I can talk on there was a question regarding, where do you get the soil for the top cover, and whether that doesn't create another problem where you got to borrow soil from another area. I mean, I can share a story from what Harmony has done. We just done a new tailings extension at Karirant in the northwest area. And one of the things we considered there was, the future soil cover for this facility, that is going to be almost 900 hectares space. And one of the things you do so that you don't have to go borrow material from another area is to do a soil balance right at the beginning. So you determine, based on the drilling program you've done of the area you want to put your tailings, you characterize the soil. There will be soil that is suitable for cover. There will be soil that is suitable for building the walls of the dam. And having done that, you are able to then determine how much depth are you going to dig in that footprint of the dam so that you can generate enough soil for the top soil cover. And therefore, you don't have to go borrow the soil in another area. And you are able to do this quite successfully because the area you dig, let's say in some areas, you only need to scrap 300 millimeter to get your topsoil out, but you can dig maybe a meter down and excavate more soil, and then you put a liner in that excavation, and then you are able then to use that topsoil as a cover at the end of the tailings dam, and that's what we definitely done at our new facility in Karirant.
Maybe just another question for you from the chat. How much coordination is there between the different mining companies with regards to retreating old facilities and trying to build one facility, for example, or is it generally that each mining company is sort of tackling this rehabilitation and closure question separately?
I think there is a lot of collaborations. There's a lot of discussions that take place in the various regions. And then obviously we look at what is the best way to deal with it, because obviously you want to have as fewer new tailings dams that you want to generate and reconsolidate as much tailings into that one single footprint. So there's quite a lot of discussions among the companies involved in the tailings retreatment in that regard.
Charles, if I may add to that,
yeah,
it sort of touches on current operations as well, where the question often gets asked, but there's 5 mines right next to each other, but each has got his own set of tailings dams. Why not combine it into one? And the challenge has often been with the question as to who's ultimately responsible for the safety. If something goes wrong and this dam fails, who's liable? And in many instances, that has been the primary stumbling block for that kind of collaboration. So it's encouraging to hear that it is happening, and I think more of it needs to happen. But in my experience, that is typically the thing that keeps progress back from happening.
There is a question, provide a few examples of tailings which have been remined and then placed into better designed facilities. So if I can respond to that one, moving quite a bit throughout. So in terms of the mine starting up, usually the grades are very high, and then they sort of build similar tailings facilities to be cost effective and make the mine profitable. And then as time passes, the grades become lower, and obviously you get buyouts of mining companies, which buy smaller mining companies, and I think we have a prime example of that happened in South Africa. So I mean, we've got DRDs cleaning up Johannesburg. Many tailings facilities are going to the big Withok and Ergo tailings facility. So that cleanup is in process. I mean, Harmony is doing exactly the same. Cleaning up, Orkney, Clarksdorp, and in Welkom as well. And then I know Sibanye is building the Far West Rand and the new facilities north of Fochville, where the gold mining industry is cleaning up all these facilities too, much better designed, much more efficient tailings facilities. And as the grade become lower, I mean, to below 0.5, 0.6 grams a ton, you need to pump 2 million tons a month to make it economically viable. So it comes back to the economics. And I do think that there are now many more examples of remining and pumping theirs to central facilities, which are much better designed for sustainable land use in the future. So it is a work in progress, and I actually think South Africa is leading the pack.
I guess it's a good thing that the gold price is over $4,000 an ounce.
Sure.
Making a lot of these a lot more attractive. I
make a comment there, because as long as there's ore in a tailings facility, it will be mined. It's a question of the risk appetite of the mineral rights owner and the commodity price. So, up until there's a point where there's an agreement between a regulator and a mine that this facility will not be reopened ever again, there's going to be recurring cost in closing that facility. So how much money do you put in a facility in order to close it when you know that it's going to be opened up again? And I mean, we have to be graceful to the mining industry in this regard that, you can close a facility, but, if we know gold's going to go, much higher, perhaps all these old facilities will become viable again. And there might be a point where the opportunity cost and the risk to open these facilities from an environmental point of view becomes so large that we simply cannot afford to open them up again. That's the point where we actually can really be serious about closure.
Yeah, well, I think we've had a really good discussion, covered a lot of different topics. And I think maybe just to, I don't know if any of you have seen a question in the chat that you would like to answer, but if there aren't any, then what I would like to ask is that if you could each just share something in closing, just your final thoughts on the webinar, any final points that you would like to make, and perhaps let's start with Andries.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, I think it was a good discussion, and the key thing for me is to make sure that you involve everybody in the process from start to finish, and don't decide for people what is best for them. Include them and get buy-in from all role players and stakeholders involved, and that is how you create a successful project.
Thanks. Yeah, collaboration is key. Rollet, any final remarks?
Yeah, I think from Harmony's perspective, rehabilitation and tailings retreatment, I think does offer quite a lot of economic benefits for the communities, and able to really extend the mining activities in the towns, where mining it's dying from an underground mining perspective. So tailings reclamation does offer, I would say, a second life to the mining industry in terms of, keeping economic, sustainability. And also, I think the benefit of freeing up land to ensure that there could be further economic activities, whether it's factories that can be put up in those land, whether it's going to be, for solar, farms and all kinds of other things, or biofuel. It does offer quite a lot of benefits. And I think it's something that, we're quite proud of to be involved in. Thank you.
Thanks, Rollet. And finally, Fanus, any last comments?
Yeah, thank you. It was really informative to me as well. And I think two things. I think firstly, we only advancing the whole era of ESG and of circular economy. And I do think that for us to get our heads around that, the mining industry is playing a huge part in catalyzing that whole process. And we should be positive and optimistic about it. But we also, need to find mechanisms to create success stories in that regard. I think secondly, to measure is to manage. The more data we can get on rehabilitation, on any aspect around successful rehabilitation, the better we can become in managing tailings. So I want to motivate anybody listening. If we can get better data, we can make better decisions. And I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fanus, Andries, and Rollet. Thank you for the really great discussion. I see there's a lot of positive comments in the chat about the session. So thanks. I will now like to hand back to Shannon to say farewell and to end off the webinar.
Thank you very much, Charles. And as Charles said, that brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to our facilitator, Charles MacRobert, for enabling an engaging discussion. Thank you also to our panelists, Andries Strauss from Knight Piésold Consulting, Fanus van Wyk from Agreenco Group, and Rollet Masakona from Harmony Gold. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Agreenco Group, DRD Gold, Harmony Gold, and Knight Piésold Consulting for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you so much to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on tailings and land rehabilitation. We hope you found this event engaging and informative. We really appreciate your participation. Our next webinar takes place on the 22nd of October at 2 p.m. and will focus on the role of private sector participation in revitalizing South Africa's transport and logistics systems. The link to register for that event was shared in the chat. The recording of today's webinar will also be sent to you in due course, and if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you so much for your time. Keep well and goodbye.